from a market's perspective, it's rare that a stock shows the pressure of an antitrust action. What is your assessment of how strong the DOJ case is against Apple?
I think it's very strong. They listed about 5 behaviors that are not intended to gather up all of the different complaints that people have about Apple, but rather the 5 behaviors that they think most probably violate the law. So those include, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, John. Please continue your thought.
Yeah, no, so those include using the App Store monopoly to prevent certain categories of apps from competing, blocking banks from accessing the NFC chip, and other matters. And those are classic exclusionary behaviors where companies that have dominant market share, market power, monopoly power, whatever you want to call it, they're usually prevented from doing things that block out competitors. I think the DOJ put forward a very compelling narrative showing how Apple, for years, has done just that.
The Apple argument in this is essentially that the consumer does have choice, right? That Apple, are the maker of a creative market. Do you think that a competitive market, right, in that they offer developers the opportunity to make a living, to make apps that are competitive with one another, does that give them any chance of warding off this fight from the DOJ?
I don't think so. If you're a developer, you have no choice but to develop for both iOS and Android. And I really doubt that the majority of iPhone customers buy iPhones because specifically of these exclusive practices. Apple makes excellent products. No one's denying that. I have an iPhone and I love it. The question is not whether Apple makes good products and whether it competes, but whether it can use its product to control other markets like smartwatches or payment apps.
John, you work at Public Knowledge, and I'm summarizing, but the goal of Public Knowledge is to make sure that each part of a technology and its stakeholders have a say in the future, right? One of the things that gets debated in the antitrust context is who is it serving? Who is it protecting? And the argument from the DOJ is that it is protecting the consumer, right? It is making sure that it ends in a policy change at Apple that would allow for the consumer to have greater choice. But does that actually ever happen? Does that actually ever become the end result?
I think it does very frequently with antitrust cases. They do take a long time to litigate, and antitrust is not the only tool that policymakers have to protect consumers. But here, I repeat again, DOJ is not suing Apple for having products that are too good or too integrated. It's suing Apple for blocking competitors from doing the same thing on the Apple platform, which is so dominant that if you're a competitor, if you're an app developer, you simply have no choice but to develop for the iPhone.
You just mentioned there that it's not the only tool. We often talk about regulating through the courts, but there is also, of course, lawmaking on Capitol Hill. Is there an avenue, do you think, for Apple to reach some kind of settlement with the DOJ, where they could just work this out behind closed doors?
I really couldn't predict whether to be a settlement. Apple's going to file an answer to the DOJ's complaint that's going to set forth its side of the story. And like I say, litigation often takes years to develop. In the meantime, though, Congress is not sitting on its hands, and other regulators around the world are not sitting on their hands. Congress introduced a bill it did not pass a while ago called the Access Act, which would have opened up the App Store monopoly just a little bit. And as you just reported, in Europe, Europe is taking action. There's litigation in Australia. So it's going to be a very complicated situation, I think, globally for Apple. And ultimately, maybe it is in their interest to try to settle and try to resolve some of these disputes. But Apple so far has shown that it just wants to fight tooth and nail and resist any attempt to regulate it or change its behavior.